What proof is there that US agents are behind the violent protests in Indonesia? Protests that are now threatening to spill over, rising in Nepal and other places too. We're going to give you some mind-blowing details from internal documents. These come from meetings involving the notorious National Endowment for Democracy, a CIA spin-off, and they show direct links between the US government and previous protests in Indonesia itself.
But first,
10 signs that you can see for yourself that reveal the involvement of foreign forces. Number 1, US colour revolutions always have colours. In Hong Kong it was black and yellow, in Ukraine orange, and in Indonesia at the moment pink and green. Always have chosen colours for people to wear and use on symbols. Number 2, US sponsored protests always co-opt youth and women, and this one is being marketed as a Gen Z protest and as a women's rights protest. Here's the ED Times pushing the women's angle. Who sponsors the ED Times? An American company, Google News, not an Indonesian company. Number 3, US sponsored protests always have a list of demands. In Indonesia, just as in Hong Kong, the protesters have 5 demands, not one less. Number 4, US sponsored protests always adopt a song and visual pop culture references. In Indonesia, like Hong Kong, they have a specific song. In Hong Kong, they used a racist frog image. And in Indonesia, they're using a symbol from a Japanese cartoon. Number 5, US sponsored protests always provoke the police into action and then blame them for taking action. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Indonesia, just as we saw in Hong Kong. Number 6, US sponsored protests always have the quiet distribution of a code, ACAB or 1312, to encourage hate against police officers. We saw it in Hong Kong and we're seeing it in Indonesia. It stands for all cops are. Number 7, US sponsored protests always have a key news image of one person confronting a row of riot police. Here's the Indonesian one. Number 8, US sponsored protests always have paid agents who rush to present the wrong information. Here's a rather well-known one, blaming China. Number 9, US sponsored protests are always attached to genuine grievances, and then lazy journalists highlight the grievances and omit any references to the US playbook. Here's the BBC doing that, and here's DW doing the same.
and now?
Number 10, the above details are not a conspiracy theory. We have been given a set of internal papers from 2023 which reveal that the US political meddling groups which worked in Hong Kong for decades have also been active in Indonesia for years. The existence of certain internal documents from US operations in Jakarta was first revealed by Mint Press News in 2023. But we recently got a similar set of papers and did a detailed study of them. What they reveal is astonishing. I'm going to share just 8 pieces of text from them. Number 1. If the presidential threshold is removed, there will be more candidates in the presidential election, and US will have more options. The US will have more options? Why is it important for the US to have more options? Isn't the US a country on the other side of the world? It's actually quite funny that the US weaponizes the concept of democracy against other nations while literally choosing who will lead their countries. I know, right? Number 2, in the same document comes an even more shocking line. US Embassy suggested that Labour Party could avail itself of the opportunity of Independence Day to launch protests. So there we have a direct quote in which the US Embassy proposes that a local group launch protests. That line itself is a smoking gun of pretty huge proportions. Number 3, the good news is that some Indonesians clearly realised that something improper was happening. Consider this line in one of the documents. Catherine mentioned that BIN has recently warned US Embassy not to interfere in Indonesian elections. Now this is followed by an assertion that they're going to use other 3-letter organisations to get past the rules. US Embassy plans to continuously support TAF and IRI programs to further implement US policies while avoiding Indonesian regulations. Again, it couldn't be clearer. The US in Indonesia is using groups to implement US policies while avoiding Indonesian regulations. That's what it says. But wait, as the TV commercials say, there's more. Number 4. In a separate document dated 2 weeks after the one I just quoted, there's other information linking the United States to what will be reported by the media as local grassroots protests. This week, under the direction of US Embassy, IRI contacted leaders of Labour Party, Partai Buruh, and several labour organisations, and then it names several groups, to discuss plans to organise protests against omnibus law on job creation and presidential threshold. So get that, the plan to organise protests were put forward under the direction of US Embassy. It's another smoking gun right there. Number 5, I want to show you a line which is about USAID, USAID, an organisation which American says is not engaged in political interference but devoted to doing humanitarian stuff like digging wells in Africa. And here's the line. USAID is interested in doing something in Indonesia related to the election. She doesn't have specifics on who indicated this to IFES and was reading from a note on her phone from someone in DC. Someone in DC? Would that be Washington DC by any chance? And USAID wanted to do something related to the election. That doesn't sound like digging wells, does it? Number 6. The same document refers to a $10 million USAID project involving a man named Justin Snyder and says the Indonesian authorities were suspicious. He said the meeting was challenging and met with some suspicion from government officials. Well, that suggests that some Indonesian government officials were doing their jobs and looking out for interference. Number 7. Another document from August of 2023 again mentions the IRI, which is the Republican-led part of the NED. Now listen to this. On August the 10th, IRI provided a third grant of 1 million Indonesian rupiah to Indra Bayu, the executive chairman of Labour Party in Pandeglang Regency. Indra Bayu appreciated IRI's support for their activities. The protests went well and brought to a successful close. So we have cash changing hands at least 3 times and includes a specific reference to protests. Number 8. Another document also includes the same elements, but in a different time frame, suggesting that this is a standard modus operandi repeated regularly. Now in this document, the Republican group, IRI, was the grant giver again. The activity mentioned was, again, a protest, but the sum handed over was 5 million Indonesian rupiah. On August 15th, with IRI support, Labour Party, Partai Buruh in Pandeglang Regency successfully launched a protest against omnibus law on job creation and presidential threshold in the Pandeglang Regency, Banten province. For this achieved milestone, IRI provided a grant of 5 million rupiah to Indra Bayu, the executive chairman of Labour Party in Pandeglang Regency. I could go on, but you get the point. Now, what does all this mean? 3 things for a start. First, it means that whatever official statements come out from Washington DC, the simple truth is that the notorious NED and its divisions, such as the IRI and the DNI, have been running the same sort of operations in multiple countries around the world. They get in with civic groups and they organise protests. Second, it shows clearly that protests presented by the BBC and every other Western mainstream media group as entirely homegrown are actually organisationally and financially linked to US embassies and Washington political interference bodies. Third, it shows exactly how the NED and its subdivisions work with civil society groups. The NED quietly extends its influence across civic bodies in a nation. At a given signal, they burst into action against the government and push out their 5 demands or whatever. But what to do about all this? Hong Kong was foolish enough to host groups such as the NED, the IRI, Radio Free Asia for decades, until the city became aware of what they were really doing, and they fled. Now, nations around the world, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Mongolia, Serbia, Moldova, Nepal, more than 100 others, they need to tell these groups they're not welcome. And if they don't leave voluntarily, be prepared to politely show them the door. You need to keep your people safe, please.